Hello, good people. My name is Doran and I am a philosopher, which means I don't really have a job. So it might come as a surprise that it took so long for me to respond to Piers Morgan having on Dan Bilzerian. Why is this interview interesting to me? Well, because as you can probably tell from the title, unless YouTube didn't let me put on the title that I originally wanted to put on and I had to change it, Dan Bilzerian kind of buys into Nazi propaganda and kind of spreads it. And today I want to show you how to recognize Nazi propaganda and what are the central hallmarks in Nazi propaganda, and in reality, what even is Nazi propaganda, right? What does it mean to believe it or to spew it or to whatever? First of all, let's just say for the maybe 5 people of you watching who don't know who Dan Bilzerian is. Dan Bilzerian is essentially a celebrity who got famous mostly over on Instagram for, I guess, being jacked and rich and hanging out with beautiful women and living an extravagant lifestyle or something like that. He's gotten into quite a bit of trouble over the past couple of years. There's been talks about him losing his wealth, maybe being involved in some shady things, which I'm not going to get into because, to be frank, I don't know a whole lot about, but I know that there's been talk of that. So that's Dan Bilzerian, and he's on Piers Morgan today to share his views, his enlightened views on the Gaza conflict.
He's back with a new outlook, a new agenda, and some very controversial opinions. So Dan
Bilzerian is back with a new outlook and new agenda. I wonder what that outlook is and what that agenda is.
What do you mean the Jews killed JFK?
So I believe that was an Israeli Mossad operation. And they've committed multiple false flag attacks. I mean, they've, the USS Liberty, you've got the Lebanon affair. I mean, so they've got a history of doing this.
So they've spent the interview so far basically bashing Israel over the Gaza conflict and discussing October 7th, which I don't intend to get into for now because I want to show you clear signs of Nazi propaganda. But here's the thing. He's doing a lot of name dropping. He's dropped names like Sabra and Shatila. He used the name Nakba, which is, it's better known, but it's still a name that many people don't know. He's using the JFK assassination to pin down on Israel. He's using the Lavon affair. He's using USS Liberty incident. And essentially what he's doing is just kind of muddying the water with throwing a lot of terms. Piers, I guess, maybe doesn't know about many of these incidents, or it doesn't challenge Dan for whatever reason, and it makes it appear as if Dan has a lot of evidence to back up his claims, because he keeps dropping names that he probably knows nothing about. For example, if he were to really know about Sabra and Shatila, he would also know that it was not the Israelis who did Sabra and Shatila. They were involved indirectly, and there was a huge backlash in Israel for Israel's involvement in the incident. But if he really did the research, he would have known. But I guess he's just counting on name dropping so that people at home have the appearance of, well, here's another incident and another incident and another incident. But it's really just, muddying the water.
I mean, that's not true. I mean, Jack Rubenstein, that was the person that killed the supposed Patsy Lee Harvey Oswald. I mean, he was a Jewish mob guy. And, there's been numerous documentaries tying the, Jewish mafia, the CIA. I mean, I wasn't there, but everything that I've seen evidence-wise points to Israel.
Really?
And, they're doing it in Epstein Island. They did it in Epstein Island. I mean,
Yeah, but here's the problem.
Again, here's the thing. He goes on about JFK, and when he's confronted about it, finally, and asked, well, you really don't have any evidence, he says, well, there was a Jewish guy involved, and these guys, the Jews, had, contact with the CIA. And by the way, Jeffrey Island, that's also related to the Jews, the Epstein Island, which has nothing to do with JFK, right? But it's like jumping to conclusions. And the Nazi thought here is that there is a grand conspiracy of Jews behind the scenes. That is why Piers is not getting what Dan is saying. Because Dan is coming from a position of basically believing that there is like this cabal of Jews, what Hitler referred to as international Jewry, okay? And they're behind the scenes, and they're holding the wealth, and they're holding the communication centers and the press, and they are carefully manipulating society in order to achieve their aims. Now, what could be the aims of the Jews? Now, back during the times of the Nazis, it was the general downfall of the West, and I would bet that Dan also believes this, but there is also a clear suspect here, and that is Israel. So what is the aim of international Jewry? To promote and strengthen the state of Israel. So this is very comfortable to bundle this up all into one nice package.
Well, there's no credible evidence that Jewish people killed JFK, and yet you just say it as a fact, as if somehow we should just believe this.
No, I didn't say it as a fact. I said that's what I believe. And if you look at, the history of people that have criticized Israel, Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein, JFK, Nixon, they all...
Okay, so that's kind of funny. Again, more name dropping to muddy the water. It's, Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein did indeed criticize Israel. They didn't like Israel. They wanted to destroy it. Gaddafi was a proponent of pan-Arabism. Saddam Hussein was when it fit his needs, and then, he did other things when it fit his needs. But to put them in the same category as JFK and Nixon, kind of, it preys upon people who don't know who Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi were. So it's more name dropping to make it appear as if there's overwhelming evidence. But then again, we'll catch the Nazi psychology in a bit.
Well, you're talking about 0.2% of the population. So obviously every single person in there is not Jewish, but it is benefiting Jewish interests, and we are operating on behalf of Israel.
Okay, so this is more promoting the idea that there is this cabal behind the scene. So this actually is a Nazi conspiracy theory. It's been promoted by Hitler and his friends. Hitler believed that the West was controlled by Jews. They were the capitalists behind the scenes, okay? But he also believed that the East was controlled by the Jews. That is, that the Bolshevik Party, the communists, were Jews because Jews were overrepresented in that movement. And so the crimes of the West were the crimes of Jews, and the crimes of the East were the crimes of Jews. The West and the East were, of course, at odds, but it didn't bother the Nazis from seeing all of this as something that's orchestrated by the Jews behind the scenes. And we will probably see, neo-Nazis today, they like to talk about the Jews as having committed a massive genocide against the Eastern Europeans, and that's what they mean when they say this. Is it sounds funny, but they do believe this. They mean that the Bolsheviks, the communists, were Jews, and thus all the deaths that we attribute today to communism are actually deaths that we should rightfully attribute to the Jewish cabal behind the scenes.
Look, I truly believe that Epstein Island was a Mossad operation, and they have dirt on our politicians. And they've done plenty of these, and that is why they control our country.
Again, this idea of a Jewish cabal behind the scenes using some sort of leverage to control society.
Do you not understand why Jewish people might feel a sense of victimhood, given that 6 million of them were killed in World War II by a genocidal monster in the Holocaust? Do you not understand why that might make Jewish people feel that, yes, they have indeed been victims?
Yeah, that figure's been revised, but I believe that Jewish supremacy is the greatest threat to America, and I think it's the greatest threat to the world today.
Okay, so that's an interesting thing that happened here. Pierce asked Dan about the Holocaust. Dan kind of dodged the question. Obviously, he's kind of a Holocaust denier, right? Because he says, the figure's been revised. So what he means to say is that the numbers are, kind of overestimated. Maybe it wasn't like a Holocaust, like people say. It's hard to say that it's Nazi propaganda because obviously the Nazis as a political force were defeated right after the Holocaust. But the neo-Nazi narrative today says essentially two things. First, the Holocaust didn't really happen, like the numbers are inflated, so that's kind of lines up with what Dan is saying. And the second thing that the neo-Nazis are saying is that the Jews kind of deserved the Holocaust. So it's like, it didn't really happen, but then again, the Jews kind of deserved this. I guess we'll see if he goes to the to mention the genocide, so-called genocide that the Jews committed in Eastern Europe as communists. Then it will imply that the Jews deserved the Holocaust and that Germany was merely trying to protect itself against the Jewish cabal after seeing what the Jews did to the Russians, right, and all the Slavic peoples. But the other thing that Dan did here was he was asked a question and he answered completely differently, right? He said, well, the figures have been revised, and then he goes on to say, by the way, Jewish supremacy is the biggest threat to the world today, which, by the way, is exactly what the Nazis believed. World War II was a war against international Jewry. Don't believe me? Read Hitler's final will and testimony. He testifies to that, and he said that the thing that he is proud of, even despite losing the war and having to off himself eventually, he's proud of being the one person who had the balls to stand up to international Jewry.
It was less than 6 million. I mean, just the mathematics don't work. Like, you can't cremate that many bodies. Like, the whole, gas chamber thing, it's a very ineffective way to kill people. So when people have researched this and they've done the due diligence, they said it's mathematically impossible.
Okay, he's obviously using neo-Nazi sources and Holocaust denial sources. World War II is actually the most well-researched event in human history by far, and what he says is not true. By the way, there's this 11-hour-long documentary called, I think, Europa, The Last Battle. It's like the neo-Nazi documentary that basically Dan, so far, almost everything he's said kind of comes from that documentary. You can quite clearly see this.
Or do you not believe that either?
Okay. I mean, Jews have killed far more Christians. Well, Jews have killed far more. Let's just accept the 6 million figure. Jews have killed far more Christians than that. I mean, it's not even close.
Okay, that has to be the communist, right? That has to be blaming communism on the Jews. So let's see if that's what it is.
If you look at the Bolshevik genocide.
There we go. The Bolshevik is basically the name for the Communist Party in Russia.
You look at the Holodomor.
And I'm translating again. When he talks about the Holodomor, he's referring to the Great Hunger in Ukraine, which Stalin inflicted on Ukraine well, it's a whole story, but basically it was a genocide against the Ukrainian. And again, he's blaming it on the Jews because everything the communists did is blamed on the Jews if you buy into the Nazi worldview.
I mean, they basically invented the genocide. So, they deny the Armenian genocide. Israel denies that. They've lobbied the U.S. to deny that. I'm Armenian. They killed half of my people. So,
Again, they killed half of my people. It's the Ottomans who committed the Armenian genocide. He's mixing up words because he knows that it's the Ottomans, but he's kind of blaming the Jews because the Jews denied the Armenian genocide for diplomatic reasons with Turkey. Many countries, by the way, denied the Armenian genocide for diplomatic reasons. But he's blaming it on the Jews, on Israel, and blaming the fact that the U.S. doesn't recognize it as the fault of the Jews, essentially, who are, of course, a cabal behind the scenes who are pulling the strings. And using the word they, when he knows it's not the Jews, right? But it's all these name dropping, and the Armenian genocide, and the Bolshevik genocide, and Sabra and Shatila, and the USS Liberty, and the, JFK, everything, just dropping so many names in order to make it appear as if there is a huge amount of evidence that makes it clear to anyone that the Jews are evil and genocidal.
No, I believe that Jewish supremacy is the greatest threat to the world today. I look at what they're doing in the media. They're pushing this transgender nonsense. I mean, and they did it in Germany. The first transgender clinic was opened by a Jewish guy. Again,
why is this straight up Nazi propaganda? When he says that the trans thing, the controlling the media and pushing trans degeneracy, as he would call it, he's referring to the Weimar Republic. That's also Nazi propaganda. The Weimar Republic was basically the name that we give Germany today, the name that we give Germany before the Nazis. So the idea of the modern Nazis, and also the original Nazis, was that after World War I and before the Nazis came into power, there was this huge, crazy degeneracy that was going on in the main German cities. And this degeneracy was being pushed by the Jews in order to weaken Germany, because they were, of course, traitors, and their goal was, I don't know, collapsing, making the civilized nations collapse or something like that. So again, he kind of name dropped it, right? It happened in Germany. If you are not educated on the subject, you wouldn't catch that he meant essentially what he means is before the Nazis came into power and took care of the Jews. By the way, there was no Holocaust, but they did stand up to the Jews. But there was no Holocaust. See the problem here?
I don't like that drag queens are reading them in schools. I don't like that Kamala Harris wants to pay for sex changes in prison.
This is, of course, all the fault of the Jews.
You know, men beating up women in boxing and sports. I think it's all nonsense, and I think it's leading to a degradation of moral fiber. And if left unchecked, I think it's going to ruin the world.
That's the Nazi argument against the Jews in Weimar Germany, essentially.
They're controlling the media. I mean, the DEI is being pushed by BlackRock. BlackRock's execs are all Jewish. You know, you look at where this is coming from. It's
okay. Looking at Pierce's face now, I think he's starting to understand that this is Nazi talking points. It took him a while, but I think he's starting to get it.
Dan,
all the Disney execs are Jewish.
Dan,
they're pushing it on children.
Right? Do you accept, Dan, that you are just blatantly anti-Semitic?
Look, I have an issue with that term. I mean, I think the real Semites are the Palestinians. I mean, they you know, the DNA test that they've done on the Israelis that are living over there, they're Eastern European Ashkenazi Jews.
Ashkenazi Jews are descendant from the Levant. This has been proved genetically. So this is false. I mean, it's not entirely false, right? Because he says they're Ashkenazi Jews, which is true, but Ashkenazi Jews are descendant from the Levant. So he's kind of missing an important point there. Also, when he says anti-Semite, the term anti-Semite is used to refer to Jews, right? They don't mean Semites in general. It's true that Arabs are also Semites, generally speaking. But when people say anti-Semite, they mean hatred of Jews. It's like someone were to blame me for being, I don't know, homophobic, right? And my answer to him would be, how can I be homophobic if I'm also Homo sapiens, right? The scientific name for biological human, okay? Of course, the term homophobic has nothing to do with the term Homo sapiens. So this is a fallacy, clearly.
You sound like a Nazi.
Ding, ding, ding. Only took, 28 minutes. He does sound like a Nazi.
That's literally what Nazis would have said in World War II. They would have literally articulated their hatred of Jewish people and the reasons why in exactly the way you've just done.
Well, there you have it. These were some of the Nazi points. I wanted to point them out so you could recognize them, because we're actually hearing about them quite a lot recently. And, well, these are straight out of Mein Kampf, straight out of Nazi propaganda. Not Mein Kampf, by the way, is the name of the book that Hitler wrote while he was imprisoned after the Munich Putsch. It was very popular in Nazi Germany. So this is what I had for you today. Be good people. See you next time.